Hey, cashify, I get where you're coming from. You're having this subjectivist opinion, and that's great. You and I agree with that starting point. When I'm talking about um, metaphysical realism, yeah, I'll make the arguments about nothing being certain and whatnot, but I think among subjectivists we have to discuss this a little differently. Okay, so you keep saying nothing's valid, nothing's true. I agree by an objectivist criteria of truth and validity, because they mean objectively valid. But you and I are not objectivists, right? So we shouldn't use an objective notion of validity and truth, and that's what I've been trying to describe to you, is that there's relative notions. See, certainty is one of these binary ideas in objectivity. You're either certain or you're not. It's like, you're pregnant or not. You're not just a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or not. You're either certain or not. But that's not how we use it. We use it relatively certain. And what that means is that, you can compare your perceptions to the conclusions you've drawn. You can see whether they're logically consistent. Okay, so this last comment you said to me is one of your videos. It is important that there be a clear definition of when evidence becomes sufficient to be considered proof. As it stands, the fact that the standard is non-existent and varies from individual to individual based on some spaghetti monster. Sorry, that's the wrong one. Um, where is the video? No, I don't even know. Okay, here, sorry. First, you quoted me. Evidence is a subset of perceptions which are consistent with a given theory about those perceptions. End quote. And then you add, it's the phrase consistent with, which is not objectively consistent when you put it that way. It's another way of saying sufficient. Sufficiency and consistency being relative notions existing differently in relation to unique individual observer and his bias, perspective, history, philosophy, agenda, pet theory, desire to look good, or fit in / phobia. I could go on, but you get it. Okay, well, that's the thing. Okay, first of all, you said objectively consistent with. We're just talking relatively consistent with, okay? And so that means that we see how consistent one theory is with our perceptions, and we see how consistent another theory is with our perceptions. So you have a model, and the model guesses things should be a certain way. How close are your perceptions to that guess? And if you have two guesses, then you should be able to compare how close they were for each guess. And then the one for which they were better is relatively more consistent. Now, is it consistent enough? I don't know. If you look at enough options, you can start to narrow in. The thing is, we don't want to use the objective criteria for these things. We want to use the subjective criteria. And I just want to, I sort of want you to get closer ideas about things like sufficiency and consistency. Sufficiency is saying, what is enough for you to make your decision? Because we're not really deciding what is true. We're deciding when to behave, when to act. And so what is sufficient for action, basically? That's different than consistency. Consistency is just talking about the logical coherence, If I see a bunch of objects, some of them are triangles, some of them are circles, and some of them are squares. Let's say most of them are squares, 80% of them. And I have all of these objects in a category. If I say that category, those objects could be described as square objects. I mean, that's 80% accurate just by the fact that 80% of them are squares. So, but that's not as consistent a theory as saying that those objects are various shapes. And one is more consistent with the perceptions I get from these objects. The one that's more consistent is, not confusing. There's no, it's not absolutely consistent. For example, if I say, oh, well, they're various shapes, well, that's not as consistent as one that says, no, they're all one of these three exact following shapes. You can have more and more consistent theories. And none of them, are absolutely consistent. Great, but They're relatively consistent. That gives me a way to get a more and more consistent system. That gives me a way to have improvement. So you can't say, oh, well, they're all equal, because none of them are absolutely consistent. It's only the objectivists that would say they had to be absolutely consistent in the first place, and we know that's impossible. So we're not going to say we have to do the impossible, right? We're going to say let's do the possible, which is to compare things for consistency. So now the problem of sufficiency is more what you're getting at. You can't define when it's sufficient evidence to know absolute truth. Well, you can define it. It's infinity. So when are you going to define when to take action without absolute proof of something? And again, this is a real life question. It depends on how pressing your need is. When's the deadline for your given decision?